can just say a few words now that we are at the end of the year. This has been a really great year for Copenhagen Atomics. We have raised a significant amount of money in the second half of 2020. We have not been affected a lot by COVID quarantines and all that stuff. We have been able to work throughout this period. Most of the time, some of our suppliers have been shut down, and some of the workshops that we use have been also not shut down, but on reduced capacity. But still, we have been able to push forward, and like I said, we have raised more money in the last half of this year than in all the previous 5 years combined. And we think there's a lot of positivism now in the nuclear field, and especially for these new type of molten salt reactors or small modular reactors. We are not the only company who got funded in 2020. There's a whole list of companies who got funded, and some of the companies in the US got a lot of support from the government in the US. Maybe not directly funding, but they got like indirect funding where the government will fund part of the cost to build test reactors. So there's really a lot of positivism, and people are moving forward, and we get more and more requests also for the products that we sell. I don't know if every one of you know, but we sell some molten salt test loops, and we've seen an increase in the number of requests to buy these loops in 2020. But now I can see there are more questions, so maybe we should take those.
Yeah, so let me read it to you, Thomas, and then you can answer them, or if I can answer them, I will also do it. Regarding regulation, who should regulate this new field of energy production?
Yeah, I can try to answer that. Well, so nuclear reactors was invented in the late 40s and 50s. And back then it was only the weapon countries. The first 5 countries who built the nuclear bomb, they were the countries also to be the first one to build nuclear power. And so in the beginning, it was regulated by the same entities who were basically who were answering to the government about the production of weapons or nuclear bombs. So this is where it started. And then later on, internationally, there was an agreement to start the international nuclear, what is it called? IAEA, International Atomic Energy Consortium or something. I can't remember what it stands for, but that's an organization which has member countries. Most of the countries in the world, I think it's like 95% of all countries in the world are members of that. And even those countries who do not have nuclear power are members, because they usually have nuclear materials for medical use or for testing weldings and stuff like that. And this is also regulated by this international body. They have their headquarters in Vienna, and they give out guidelines for how to make safe nuclear reactors. And then the local countries, they use those guidelines to then make the rules that apply in that specific country. And there's a little bit of difference between different countries about what rules are in place, but in general, they are similar because they come from this international collaboration through the IAEA. But especially for this molten salt reactors, which is a completely new type of nuclear reactors, there is no regulations in place, and there's a lot of discussions. And we from Copenhagen Atomics and many of the people from the other companies also participate in different panels and discussions and forums where we try to basically write down the rules for this new industry. And of course, when we do that, we try to make them similar to the rules that exist for light water reactors. But there's quite a number of changes that need to be made, because now this is going to be manufactured on assembly lines. It's not using high pressure. There's no risk of meltdown. There's a lot of these things that are different. So the rules need to change. And there's no country yet who have said, now we are ready to approve a molten salt reactor. But US and Canada are getting close, I think.
Okay. What effort is needed to employ fuel elements?
I didn't understand the question. In the classical nuclear reactors, fuel are bundled in, fuel are bundled in long metal rods where there's some fuel pellets inside, and this is how the fuel is. It's called fuel assemblies, all these long rods of solid fuel. But in molten salt reactors, the fuel is dissolved in a salt, and the salt is a liquid thing. It's similar to table salt. If you take that up to say 800 degrees, it will melt and it becomes similar to water, and then you can dissolve things in it. And because those salts can actually consist of metals, uranium and thorium can be dissolved directly in that salt.
Peter Smith answers the fuel elements from a pressure water reactor, from a PWR.
Yes, this is what is considered waste after they have been used. It's sometimes called used nuclear fuel, sometimes it's called spent nuclear fuel, sometimes it's called very dangerous radioactive waste. There's different ways of describing it. And it is true that today it's basically, it usually sits in spent nuclear fuel pools around classical nuclear reactors and wait for a disposal method. And people don't want to throw it away because it has a lot of value. It's actually more valuable after it has been burned than before it's burned. But it's expensive to convert it into new fuel for reactors. And this is only France is doing that right now. But we can do that efficiently or economically when we want to build waste burners. And this is one of the reasons why thorium is a really, really good idea, because it suddenly makes it economic to solve that waste problem for the old classical nuclear reactors.
And Peter Bogars asks a thing, Thomas, that we have discussed, I think, also a lot of times, is what are the real challenges now for building the first working reactor? And he puts down between brackets technically. So what are the technical hurdles to currently build the first reactor?
Well, we have built most of the components now that is going to be used in a reactor. We want to test them much more carefully. So you could say that we still need a couple of thousand hours of testing before it would be reasonable to go forward and actually build a reactor. And I guess this is the same for other companies. There are some companies who haven't even started testing components, but they hope that they can buy components from other suppliers, and those suppliers could potentially be us. Yeah, so there's a lot of testing going on. Then there are some people who believe, because classical nuclear reactors usually last for 50 or 60 years. So there's some people who believe that these new type of molten salt reactors should also last for 50 or 60 years. And that's going to be really difficult because we run at much higher temperatures, like 700 degrees. And then the salts that we use are quite corrosive. So if you want to make these reactors last for 50 years, then you need a lot of research, like a huge amount of research. But I don't think that's a reasonable way to go. I think over the next many decades, we will continuously improve, and maybe eventually we will get up to our reactors running for 20 or maybe even 30 years. I don't think I'll see some of these reactors running for 50 or 60 years within my lifetime. Well, obviously, but like even new ones that are built. It's something that might come in the distant future, but I think we can use these reactors right now, even if they can only last for 5 years, because it's not super difficult to recycle them and reuse all the materials they're built from and build a new one and run it again. And the reason it has a limited lifetime is basically because at these high temperatures, the steels that we use, or the metals and the construction materials, it's difficult to prove that they will have the same integrity or not degrade over a long period of time. It's much easier to prove that they can be used for 5 years. And then once we have the whole process under control and have less corrosion, then maybe we can prove that they can last for 10 years. And then again, if we improve the corrosion resistance, then they can last longer again. We can also make new materials. There are some of the competitors or some of the companies in this field who wants to use very expensive materials right from the beginning, because then they hope to extend the life. But because we have done a lot of research with the chemistry, we know that if you don't have the chemistry right, it doesn't matter how expensive materials you have, it's not going to last very long. So the chemistry is the first important thing to get under control. I hope that sort of answers the question. there's a lot more details to that. There's 1,000 people working on this every day.
Yeah. We've got still by now 10 or 11 questions still outstanding. So let's try to get as many through as possible and keep it a bit short. One in the chat. First of all, a question: can I get such a nice ball of thorium as a promotion object? So do we have those? I think we don't have them as an association. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, Thomas Jan.
Well, we have some steel balls that we give out for promotion. Yeah. The thing is, a thorium ball that size, you need export and import licenses to move that across borders, and even just to have that if you have it in your house, you need a safe, and you need a license to have that in your safe. So it's not something we can just give away.
No. But the second question from Andre is, why is Europe not interested in the development? I think my 2 cents on it is, I think Europe is interested in the development. There is a lot of research going on. However, you've got a twofold in the development and research at universities, what is a lot subsidized. They want to research new things, but you have also the existing concepts that just need to be executed. And there is that's where you have the difference in university research and funding and these kind of things, and that needs to come together more. And that's not coordinated, I think, really well right now, and that needs to be much better. So I think Europe is interested, but it's in pockets and small. And to really do this, we need to get more interested. And I think you see some development in Italy, some in France, some in the Netherlands, Denmark. We have some developments, and to compete, I think, to the whole world, we need to bring these countries together, and the clubs or the groups that do this to really join forces and be faster. All right, Thomas, I don't know if you have something to add on that.
I just want to say I agree.
Good. Has Frans Timmermans approached us with your idea, as he has a portfolio of CO2 reduction by 2050, Henk van der Linde says. He hasn't approached us. We can try to approach him, but that will be a bit difficult. But it's worth a shot, I think. So if anybody knows him, let's have a talk and a coffee with him. Peter Schmid has another question. What effort is needed to employ fuel elements? So what effort is needed to bring those fuel elements out of I think a light water reactor towards the
Is it, let me try to, is it to convert existing spent nuclear fuel from light water reactors into Kickstarter fuel that can be used for a molten salt reactor? I assume this is the question, but I'll try to answer it shortly. So there's a process, a chemical process that needs to happen to convert existing fuels into Kickstarter fuel for a molten salt reactor. And this has been done already many times in the lab, also in Europe. But you need, it's difficult to get a lab where you are allowed to do this research, and it has only been done in small quantities. We need to show that we can scale that up to larger quantities. The thing is, it's a little bit expensive, and so you don't want to do it if you don't have a process that can actually use that fuel. But it can be done, and there's lots of research papers, even publicly, on that.
Yeah, and the second question was, is there reprocessing, chemical separation? So you just explained that a bit, I think. Then Pox Geza, I probably pronounced it totally wrong. My apologies for that. In my opinion, aluminium production would be an ideal candidate for nuclear technologies. Aluminium production requires a lot of stable electricity. There are a lot of places that had aluminium production, but it was closed because of cost of electricity. You nod yes, so that you agree?
Yes. We need to look at the green transition, and a lot of times the politicians are just talking about how we should have electrical cars, and that is a thing, but it's a small piece in the puzzle. The really big pieces in the puzzle are, for example, aluminium production needs steel production, cement production, fertilizer production. Those are the things that use huge amounts of energy. And today they run almost purely on fossil fuels. Aluminium production, though, they run in countries like Iceland and Norway, where they have cheap or low-cost electricity. But of course, if we had these molten reactors that can produce low-cost electricity anywhere in the world, then aluminium production could also happen in many other places where they don't need to be, where the electricity is cheap. And the same goes a little bit for mining. There's a lot of mining operations for all kinds of materials that needs huge amount of energy. And so that's also a very interesting customer for these new types of reactors.
Peter Bogars has a few questions. I start with the first one that is already online as a YouTube channel movie, but maybe you can answer it quickly, Thomas. Okay, one golf ball is enough, but how much is there in the world of thorium to use?
Oh yeah, so there's lots and lots of thorium. We sort of know the amount of thorium from the mining that is already going on, and when people do mining, they can see how big a percentage of the whatever they get out of the ground is thorium. And we have there's between 3 and 4 times as much thorium as there is uranium, and there's also thorium in every country of the world. It's you either find it when you mine for zirconia or stuff like that, or you find it in beach sands. In a lot of countries, like India, for example, has a lot of thorium in their beach sands. It's normally when you see beaches where the sand is a little bit dark, that's because there's a lot of thorium in it. Also in Brazil, there's lots of thorium in the sand. We also have a place in Denmark where there's this thorium sand.
And then Peter Bogars also asked, how is the IAEO looking towards the setup of thorium energy?
I couldn't quite hear the question.
How is the IAEO, the nuclear looking towards the setup of thorium energy? How are they looking against it?
There's a number of working groups trying to set up or discuss how rules could be different. There's some people who make a lot of money from making safety systems for the nuclear industry. They would like it to be a little bit like the classical nuclear reactors, where every instrument has to be calibrated as often as possible, and where every document has to be reviewed as often as possible and by as many people as possible. And then, of course, there's people like us who want to bring this technology to the market, and we're trying to push and see, could we relax some of the rules a little bit when we can show that it's completely safe and there's no reason to believe that anyone could die from this. And I don't know exactly where this will end.
Let me see. There's also a lot on the chat still coming in. Andre Bijkerk has 2 questions. Is EDF interested in the MSR, so the French organization? They have about 60 uranium reactors running and suggested to build one in Holland. They are interested in building more reactors. I don't know if they're interested in thorium. I don't know, Thomas Jan, if you've heard about that.
We meet a lot of people who work there at conferences, and they are definitely interested. But whether the top management has it as a strategic decision to go in that direction, I haven't seen any mention of that.
And then Andre says, can we prevent the Netherlands landscape and nature destroyed by panels and turbines by promoting thorium? Andre, I do think so. Although, we've got multiple people in the Netherlands saying that a thorium reactor will still take 15 to 20 years. And the goals for CO2 reduction needs to be within these 20 years. So therefore people, and especially people against saying it's no use. If you talk to the likes of Thomas Jan, but also other companies that are trying, they think if the right funding is done and the right cooperations from governments and regulators, it can be much faster, and then it can indeed prevent us to destroy a landscape of solar panels and windmills. a little bit, because I think still to scale to get all the coal out, we need probably both. But on the other hand, if we really can scale thorium very fast, it can go also very quickly that you just put a multiple thorium reactors in the Netherlands, which uses much less space.
Yes, and I want to add just like 1 year ago, if somebody said we're going to approve a new vaccine in half a year, nobody would have believed you. Everybody would have told you it's impossible. But now we know that with the COVID virus, they can approve a vaccine in less than half a year, and people are willing to take it. And it's a little bit the same here. Nuclear reactors used to be built in between 1 and 3 years back in the 50s and 60s, but today it takes 10 years to get one approved. But I'm sure that if the will is there, of course we can change that and make approvals in half a year and still make something that is safe. But we need the public to be willing to do that.
And Andre says, great, thanks. Janos Vosser asked, and I think it's to do also with the Peter Smit question, what does it take to prepare nuclear waste for fuel? I think we partly discussed it already, but I'm not sure. So what does it take to prepare the fuel for a molten salt reactor?
Well, it's a chemical process. It's you basically convert when it's in the old fuel form, it's a ceramic. So it's a uranium ceramic where 95% of the ceramic comes from uranium oxide. And then you need to convert that into, you need to separate it into these 3 different things that Sergey talked about before: the uranium part, the fission product part, and then the long-lived actinides part. And that's a chemical process to separate that. And then the more pure you can make the uranium, the better value you can get when you sell it back to the international uranium market. And basically all the rest you have, the dirty part, that is what you put into the waste burner, the long-lived actinides and whatever dirty residues.
And then we have Engel Hoefgeest. Professor Kloosterman in the University of Delft in the Netherlands wants to build a prototype MSR and needs 200 million euros for that. Who's going to finance him? Europe? Question mark.
I would hope that just like in the US, now the US government has sponsored 2 companies with $80 million each to build. It's not to build an entire reactor, but it's a lot of the first steps to get towards building a test reactor. And I would hope that Europe would do the same, sponsor a couple of companies and maybe even some universities in Europe to also build reactors with a similar amount of money.
Okay. And then Peter Smit has 2 open questions still. One is, how do you throw the U-pellets into molten salt? And in the demo salt loop, you reach a temperature of 700 degrees. How high could it get? And does this depend on the salt? When will those salts evaporate?
Yes, let's start with the temperature thing. So these salts are very stable. We use something called fluoride salts, and they are usually it depends a little bit on what's in the salt, but they usually have boiling points around 1700 to 2000 degrees Celsius, and the steel will melt way before that. So the limiting factor is your construction material. We plan to use stainless steel for our first test reactor, and then use silicium carbide. Silicium carbide can go to much higher temperatures than steel, but it's also more fragile. So we don't want to make like heat exchangers, for example. We don't want to make those out of silicium carbide or silicon carbide.
Good. And one more on Peter Smit. Could the molten salt be used to store excess power from windmills and solar panels? Would this provide a paid test bed for the technology?
Yes, it's already being used like that. There's this thing called concentrated solar power plants where you have a lot of mirrors pointing up towards a tower, and they heat salt and they store that salt in tanks, and then they can even produce electricity during the night when the sun is not shining. The same method can be used. So when you have windmills running during the night, for example, in Denmark, there's many windy nights where we have more than 100% of our electricity supply from wind power. and so it sells to the neighboring countries at negative prices. But of course, we could also use that electricity to heat up salt, and then use that during the daytime for some good work, or like sell the heat. The thing is, if you want to then convert that heat back into electricity, then there's lots of losses. There's usually something like 65% losses, so it's not a good storage medium if you want to go back into electricity. But if you can use the heat, then it becomes a very good storage medium. So, and there are already companies who are building test projects for that, and we are supplying parts to that.
Cool. And Peter Bogers asks a question: how small can a molten salt reactor be? Is it possible to make small ones to build into polluting ships, airplanes, cars maybe, or is it something for the far future? Well, actually, there is a company also underscribing the petition, and that's Core Power, and they are looking into deploying it on boats, as I understand. Right, Thomas Jan?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And yeah, molten salt reactors can easily be used for big ships, and I think it will be. It will also be used for barges. So we see these floating nuclear power plants on barges. I think it will be used there. I don't think I will see it in airplanes in my lifetime. But actually, the molten salt reactor concept was developed in the U.S. by it was paid for by the Air Force because they wanted to make a nuclear bomber, a bomber that could fly like for a month at a time without refueling, and be fueled by a nuclear reactor. And the Russians actually did fly an airplane with a nuclear reactor inside, but unfortunately the pilot died too early. It's not a good idea to put nuclear reactors on airplanes.
Okay, and then Ernst Mund is asking, what about Thorcon International Consortium? Are you working in connection with this project? I think, Ernst, that both the association has contacts with Thorcon as Thomas Jan and Copenhagen Atomics. So we are in contact with them. We talk to them. They have also a great idea. So there is contact, and we're working with this project also partly with them. Then how will the electric energy be generated, from Tobias?
Yes, so that's always a debate. So for more than 100 years, we have been generating electricity by burning different things and then boiling water with that heat, and then the boiling water, the steam from that, we drove steam turbines, which then produce electricity. But you could say in more general terms, everything we humans do, we burn something to make heat, and then we turn that heat into rotating axles, whether it's driving a generator or a ship propeller, or even a diesel truck, the wheels. It's basically, first we burn something to generate heat, and then we have different types of machinery that converts it into something that rotates. And this conversion from heat to something that rotates is a really bad efficiency. Steam turbines typically have efficiencies around 35%. And if you have a diesel engine in a truck, it's much worse. It's like only 20% of the energy goes down to the wheels, maybe even less than that. In really big power plants where you can also use some of the heat for district heating, you can get higher efficiencies. And there also exist new technologies that are used, for example, in jet airline engines and in gas-fired power plants, where you can get the efficiency up to 45%. And there are also technologies that will come in the future where you can get up to 50 or 55%. And especially those new technologies work really, really well with molten salt reactors because we have the high temperatures.
Yes, and then we have a few, I think, great suggestions. One from Greg Gifford: have you looked at using advertising company to run a campaign, local or news outlets? I definitely think that's a good idea. We are running some Google ads, but we need to have a company that wants to help us. But we're also an association where we just want to reach the public, and we have not a lot of resource and money on this, but we're trying our best. So if you know companies that want to help us on a low tariff, most helpful. Steven Viljoen, somebody from the village here that I know very well. He says, congrats on the work and effort so far. Exciting times to come. My question is, as a normal person, how can I be part of the community? What role would you like us to play as a normal person to get the ball rolling faster? And what are the deadlines on your next steps? I think how to get the ball more rolling is start talking to people, invite them for these master classes, get them excited. The more people we have behind us, the more we can achieve. Of course, if you speak to people that are very influential in the investment world, in the politics, or anywhere, let them contact us directly or organize a meeting. And then on deadlines, I think that's something for Q1 for Thomas Jam and me and Piet Hein, who's also involved, and others who want to let's set some deadlines. I know that Thomas Jam for Copenhagen Atomics has some deadlines with the great funding he got recently to have a prototype non-vision in the next 2 years or so, I think, Thomas Jam. So yes, end of 2022, he wants something running without that without a fission product. So that's a deadline I think that he's putting on himself, and we can only help to change the public opinion that he then can put radioactive stuff in it, so that we can really start running it and make electricity. And then another suggestion from Tony. Within the EU, there's a lot of attention for digital sovereignty and digital autonomy. Thorium can be a game changer for dependency on energy sources. So maybe that's a really good idea to discuss it in that way with Europe. A very good suggestion, I think. And I think then we're almost through it. One more. Is enough done to centralize all research to move forward fast? Is there a central knowledge center, and is everybody sharing knowledge? Well, actually, Peter, that's exactly why we started the association and this petition, that we want to get people engaged in let's do this centrally, because, and this is a really nice conversation I had with Thomas Jam, I think in the summer, where we said to each other, yeah, if Copenhagen Atomics goes by himself, and as his company, then it's 10, maybe 20 people. Whilst if we combine it with the TU Delft and combine it with other groups, you suddenly have 50 to 60 people, or maybe 100 people. And if they work together and share knowledge, we can really go faster. And that's the idea. Like, how can we, with probably everybody having a different role, but how can we really bring this forward by collaborating? Because Thomas Jan answered me, I think, at that point. He says, yeah, Serge, if I stay alone, I might survive this company. But if I join with others and we have a good idea, we probably become the biggest and we really get successful, but we also are meaningful in the world. And so maybe that's the option.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I really see if we should really make an impact on the world, we need Thorium Energy to become as big as oil and gas. And if we want to become that big, we need lots and lots of people. Like I could easily see that we will be 100,000 people working in this industry by 2030. But if we need that many people, you know, we need more people to be educated at the universities. There will be many, many more startups in this field. There will be even also a lot of sub-suppliers that supplying components and doing testing and all that stuff. So yeah, I think we really need to look at this as an industry that is going to scale, just like we saw in the past with the PC industry or the computer industry or the mobile phone industry and internet industry, all those things.
So I want to thank everybody for participating and help us on this journey, but also join us on the journey, because it's not us. As you see, we talk a lot about collaborating and doing it together. So let's see how we can help, how we can do it together. and wishing you a very happy New Year, and hopefully have a nice toast with New Year's Eve in probably small groups with COVID, but also try to convince others to join us.